Richard Sherman said on his podcast this week when he was interviewing Geno Smith that he had heard a little whisper that the Seahawks or Pete Carroll was going back to the old scheme. Now, Richard Sherman is still very connected with the Seahawks, knows a lot of people in the organization, in particular players like Bobby Wagner, who he's got a great relationship with. He interviewed Quandre Diggs just last week. So clearly he knows things and he knows people in there. And there's no real reason for him to say this unless there is a nugget of truth. And I've got to say, I was really happy to hear those words from Richard Sherman. There are too many teams in the NFL who have seen Vic Fangio's schemes work and they've tried to copy them. And nearly all of them have failed. Unless you have Vic Fangio, and there's only one team out of the 32 that have him, and that's the Miami Dolphins, and well done to them. Unless you have Vic Fangio, then it has proven very difficult to copy what he does so well. And how many more teams have to struggle to defend the run, struggle to execute the way the safeties move around the field, to execute this scheme before we eventually just go, tried it, failed it, move on. You look at the teams that are succeeding on defense, most of them are influenced somewhat by the old Carroll scheme, or at least have got some DNA there, or coaches that has worked with Pete Carroll in the past. We're talking about the San Francisco 49ers, who had Robert Saleh for a long time. The Jets defense has succeeded with Saleh going there. The Dallas Cowboys with Dan Quinn. The Philadelphia Eagles have been running a front four. They've just appointed a coach who was working with the Seahawks last year. And yes, he's from the Fangio tree, but he's now, I guess, also someone who's worked with Pete Carroll for a year as well. So there are more things in common with that way of doing things, in particular with this defensive front four, than there are with Fangio. And if the Seahawks had gone out and appointed Vic Fangio, I'd be more than happy to continue with some of these barefront concepts and these 3-4 looks and all of that. But I kind of feel like if you haven't got Vic Fangio and you have Pete Carroll, who himself has already created a very good defense, and yeah, do you know what? Maybe it's true that a bit of it had gone stale. After all of these years, they had to mix things up a little bit, but the results have been worse for the most part. And the Seahawks can't continue to keep trotting out a defense that give up loads and loads of yards and can't defend the run. They've got to do something about that. So I'm happy. I think if they're going to go back to some of these older schemes, that's a good idea. And I appreciate it. You know, I've just listed some teams there, like the Niners, who've got a good defense. They've got Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead. The Dallas Cowboys have got Micah Parsons. The Jets have got Quinn Williams. You do need some good players in able to have a great defense. And I totally get that. But the Seahawks have got a pick number 5, they've got pick number 20, they've got 37, they've got 52, they've got a 3rd round pick as well. Hopefully they're going to find some good defensive players, and they are going to draft for their defensive front. So hopefully they're going to get the kind of impact players that can give them a good defense. Playing with a front 4 instead of a front 3 is just going to give them a better opportunity to defend the run. That was one of their big problems last year. And hopefully they can finally get the pass rush going. So for me, I like the idea. But it's not just that. There are other reasons for this. One of the other big reasons that I'm a fan of this is simply for the situation that the Seahawks find themselves in. They only have 2 defensive tackle types that you can really feel confident about going into next year. That's Jaron Reed and Draymond Jones, the 2 free agent signings. Everybody else has either moved on or has been cut. So you are going to have to add some players. And you can't do it all via the draft. You can't just be relying on rookies to come in and just completely pan out the defense. The chances are they're going to have to, some way or another, sign some veterans after the draft has finished. And when you look at the available options, there are a couple of players who really stand out. And the Seahawks have kind of leaned on their prior relationships and the players that they know. Poona Ford's still available, for example. I don't think Poona Ford played very well in the 3-4, the bare front, or whatever you want to call it, last year. I think he's played his best football when the Seahawks have used more of the Carroll scheme. If you are going to try and lean on Poona Ford and go, hey, come back and give us another chance here, and we want you, and we want you to be part of the rotation again, the only way I think you can justify that is to put him back in a front 4, which is where he's performed the best. And he isn't a natural nose tackle in a 3-4 scheme. But if they feel that his best position is nose or one technique or whatever it is, in a four-man front, that's a good role for him with his shape and the frame that he's got. So he's a good fit. So it's more justifiable to bring him back. And we're probably going to see the best from him if they revert back to the old scheme. And then the other player who could be a really good option for them is Frank Clark. Frank Clark still unsigned. Frank Clark is not a 3-4 outside linebacker. He's not a 3-4 defensive end. He is a 4-3 pass rushing defensive end. If you wanted to bring in another edge rusher, and if for whatever reason that simply wasn't an option to you in this draft, it's far easier to go to Frank Clark afterwards and see if you can strike a deal with him. Now, I appreciate for either of those two things to happen, they're going to have to create some cap space. They're going to have to sign some players anyway. They're not going to solve every single one of their needs in the draft. There's going to come a point after the draft when they're going to have to find some money from somewhere, and then they're going to have to make some signings. And they, of the available options, make more sense than perhaps most, provided you're willing to revert back to Seattle's scheme. They're known in Seattle. The Seahawks know what they're going to get from Ford and Clark. So I think if you do switch back and you can't maybe fill all of those defensive line needs, there are a couple of really good options compared to maybe having to dig around for these like 3-4 defensive ends. And, you know, people could go, what about Sean Robinson? And look, I've got no problem with that. If they stick with the 3-4 and they go and sign Sean Robinson, that's fine. But he's had some injury issues. You know, with respect, Poona Ford hasn't. And Frank Clark, you know, he's been somewhat consistent, I guess. I mean, he's always provided an impact to the playoffs. So for me, it just seems to make, you know, a little bit more sense there. And then, you know, one of the other things is the reason why they're attractive as post-draft options is because, as John Schneider laid out when he spoke to 710 Seattle Sports and he did a press conference as well, you kind of get yourself into trouble when you are forcing needs. It's very easy to look at Seattle's current roster and say that their biggest need is on the defensive line. Now, if they're going to go into this draft and go, okay, we need to sign a whole bunch of defensive linemen, otherwise we're not going to be able to field a team next year, that's exactly what they're saying they're trying to avoid. I think they need the ability, for example, to go and say, okay, Michael Mayer's there at number 20, we're going to take him. Or, do you know what? Will Anderson's gone and we really believe in Anthony Richardson. We think that he can be the NFL MVP one day, or he's got that upside. We want to take a chance on him at number 5. You can't do any of those things if you are saying, you know, we've got to have a defensive lineman, we're forcing the needs, we've got to take these guys. So if they want to keep their options open, and it can be anything, it doesn't have to be for Anthony Richardson or Michael Mayer, it can be for any different position. Pick a position, offensive line, anything really, linebacker, I don't know, pick a position, wide receiver. You are forcing yourself to go for needs, though, if you're looking at this and going, well, we've got to go D-line at 5 and D-line at 20, otherwise the roster isn't going to be good enough, there's going to be full of gaps. So, yeah, if they want to keep things open and avoid drafting purely for need, there's less to do. I mean, for starters, you could play a team right now. You could put Draymond Jones at 3 technique, Jaron Reed at the 1, you could put Darrell Taylor at defensive end and Boya Mafe, and you could probably put, you know, Uchenna and Wosu as like a Sam Leo type, and you can play Bobby Wagner and Devin Bush, and you know, you've got a front 7 there. You've got a front 7. It might not be elite. People might not be excited by that, but look at the other option. Right now, they only have 2 defensive linemen who can realistically start in the 3-4 front, and that's just it's not going to be enough. So you have to go out there and really pad out your options in your draft. So I think it makes some sense. It makes some sense schematically for what's working in the league, based on what's still out there in terms of free agents. And do you know what? For me, it isn't going to make a huge amount of difference. I think this idea that the Seahawks can create this otherworldly defense, and that will be the catalyst for the championship alongside a running game, and you can just plug any old quarterback in there, or that, you know, Geno Smith will be suffice, even if he's playing the way he did in the second half of the season. I think that's a bit of a pipe dream. As I keep saying, it took the Niners nearly a decade, and having to pick second overall to get the defense that they've got. Was it 7 first-round picks in 9 years on defense to create this unit, including Nick Bosa second overall, and actually being in position where a Bosa's even available, which is very rare. Those types of players are not there every year, as we're seeing this year, because there's nobody like Nick Bosa. It's very hard to create a defense like that. More often than not, you've kind of got to plug guys in. You've got to be deep. You look at the Eagles. They don't have a Nick Bosa on their defensive line, but Hassan Reddick was a smart addition. Maybe Draymond Jones can be a smart addition for the Seahawks, but then you've got to get depth. You've got to have a mix of some younger players and some veterans. Not everybody has to be an elite player. You put a defensive unit together, you make some intelligent trades, and then what do you need? You need a really dynamic offense. That's the modern NFL, and the Seahawks have got some pieces that can make a dynamic offense, but they need more. And listen, I like Geno. I respect Geno. I'm looking forward to watching him play again in 2023 to see what he can do. He's got the bit between his teeth. The contract will make sure that he's motivated. I'm keen to see what he can do. But I'm also very interested in seeing someone like Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud in the background, learning, developing over the next year or even two as an heir apparent. Because look, let's be honest, Geno Smith's going to be 35 in a couple of years. And although people say there's less tread on the tyres, I don't know. You don't stop aging just because you've not played NFL football. Trust me, I'm 38. You carry on aging. So there's no denying that. He's not necessarily going to play into his 40s just because Tom Brady did it or Drew Brees did it. It doesn't work like that for everybody. So having somebody who can sit and learn from Geno, who I think could be a good mentor, and he says he's up for it, you build an explosive offense, you keep adding options to your defense. I think that's the way to win. And I think trying to copy the Niners rather than finding a way to beat the Niners consistently would be a mistake. I think you've got to say, what's the best way to stop them? I personally think if Anthony Richardson was developed properly over the next year or two, I can't think of a better way to slow down that pass rush than have somebody who's explosive as a runner, who can be creative, who's really difficult to bring down in a tackle, and to get him throwing the ball downfield and running around and creating plays while your bookend tackles continue to learn and grow and get stronger. That, to me, combining with Ken Walker and DK Metcalf and hopefully some other weapons, is a pathway to future success. So I like the scheme change. I think it will help the Seahawks put a defense together. I think you can see the pathway forward. I'm not interested in just going down this Vic Fangio route because it's the fashionable thing to do. When the Seahawks were at their best, they were the trendsetters. They were the ones who were going with the big cornerbacks. They were the ones who were the Carroll scheme was in fashion. People wanted Seattle's coaches to go and be head coaches and coordinators at their teams. I'm not comfortable with the Seahawks being a copycat team, a team that looks what other people are doing and tries to copy a bit of that. And maybe they've done that a bit too much. And I support them with trying to use some of the concepts of the Sean McVay offense because it's modern NFL offense. I wasn't against the Vic Fangio idea, but I think also sometimes you've got to draw a line under something, a bit like the Niners are doing with Trey Lance, by the way. They kind of seen that was a mistake. We're going to draw a line under it and move on. Sometimes you've got to be prepared to do that. And if the Seahawks are doing that with this scheme, going back to what they know, what their coaches know best, what they're more comfortable in, where the players are actually available, that you can bring in either in the draft or in free agency, it makes a whole bunch of sense. For me, I'm giving it a thumbs up if they are going back to the old scheme. And if it don't work, well, fine. But I think you might as well not work trying what you know rather than it not work trying to be Vic Fangio as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Stay with us over the draft's nearly here. There's going to be so much content on this channel, so much content on Seahawks Draft Blog. We've got a live stream coming up on Sunday with Adam and Robbie. Interview with Tony Pauline is right around the corner as well. I'll be doing loads of streams, loads of videos on draft night itself, instant reaction to all of Seattle's picks throughout the draft, live streams at the end of every single day. Do not miss a thing, and the best way to not miss a thing is to subscribe so you see all the videos. Give this a like. Give me your thoughts on the potential defensive scheme change in the comment section as well. Check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Until next time, bye for now.